If you've ever found yourself disappointed by your download numbers, or you're tracking your podcast stats month to month, but you're struggling to keep listeners engaged, then this episode is for you. We're diving deep into podcast messaging, the messaging around your podcast that helps your listeners know that they're in the right place and that they're among friends, and to keep them engaged. Brian Fleming hosts PodGasm Marketing, where he helps podcasters clarify their message so that they can keep listeners coming back for more. And in this episode, we cover how to clarify your podcast marketing message, how to write episode titles that get more clicks, the two biggest podcast cover art mistakes that podcasters are making, how to really get into the mind of your ideal listener so that you're perfectly positioned to solve their problems, and so much more. If you want to get more listeners to join your tribe and stay listening, then this episode is for you. Brian, welcome to Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing?
I'm pretty well. Thanks for having me on today.
You're very welcome. So Brian Fleming, he hosts PodGasm Marketing, and he helps podcasters clarify their podcast marketing message so more people will listen. So I really wanted to talk to you today and just dive right into messaging around podcasting for the listeners. So if anyone's not 100% clear, what exactly is podcast messaging, brand messaging from a podcasting perspective, and why should podcasters care when they're launching a podcast about their messaging?
Yeah, one of the big problems that most podcasters have, especially in the beginning, this is why I love working with new podcasters especially, but growing podcasters who are existing as well. Most podcasters struggle to talk about what they do in a clear and compelling way that gets the attention of the right people and actually adds value to those people, and not just gets their attention, but makes them want to or have to listen. Have you ever read a headline or a episode title of a podcast where when you read that title, you had to listen to it? It was almost like you didn't have a choice because it was so compelling and on point. There's a reason it was written the way it was. Now, the thing is, most podcasters, they're good at what they do, at what they teach. They're not necessarily copywriters. I've been a professional speaker for 17 years, and I've been a copywriter for almost that same amount of time. So I put in a lot of reps. I've written thousands of headlines, most of which sucked, but that's how you get good at them. And I know headline structures that work and how to apply them to different things that people are doing so that the right people notice your podcast and they understand the value they're going to get out of it, what you help them overcome, things like that, and why they need to listen. So being able to say what you do in a clear, compelling way is not always an easy thing to do unless you're trained to do it. It's not about saying it in a more complex way or a sophisticated way. It's actually sort of like taking what you do from the PhD level and saying it in the first grade level, because that's the language of clarity that most people speak and understand the most.
Yeah. And what are some really common mistakes, some specific things that podcasters you see often make when they're launching a podcast, whether that's, we've touched on titles around like the description, maybe the actual name of the podcast. What are some really common mistakes that you see?
Well, the first thing is they'll spend a bunch of money on a great microphone, like the one I'm using, for example, a Shure SM7B. They'll get the microphone, the camera, they'll set up a studio, they'll subscribe to the host and do all this stuff, set it up. But at the same time, they haven't created a clear way of saying what they do. So there's this old phrase in marketing that says, great marketing will only make a bad product fail faster. And that's what a lot of podcasters do. They think, well, I'll just start putting stuff out. It's better than nothing. Not always. Because if you have a good product, you have good episodes, but your wrapping paper sucks, if your titles and your description is so off brand that people just don't really, they look at it and they don't know what they're going to get out of it, then they scroll on by and they go listen to someone else who might be talking about the same thing you are, but they said it better and they said it in a more clear way. So the one big mistake is they invest in all this equipment and everything except the brand message, which is funny because your brand message, it's your words. And people make buying and listening decisions based on the words they read or hear. And in a podcast, the medium is all words. It's spoken words. And if you don't have that clarified, you're putting out, it's like shooting smoke out into the woods and then telling them, "Hey, go find, whatever is out there." And they're like, "Okay." And then they're kind of running around in this fog and they're like, "Is it that way or was it that way?" They're kind of lost. I always say that, what you want to do is that realize that your listeners are on a battlefield. I have a military background. I fought the war in Afghanistan back in 2006. I had some crazy experiences there, but I think from a military mindset. And the thing is, your listeners are on a battlefield and they want to get across that battlefield. They're trying to get across, a minefield without stepping on a bomb and getting blown up. Well, they don't know how to do that. Well, your podcast should be the air support, the person on the radio telling them where to step, telling them where to go, where not to go, so they can safely get from where they are to where they want to be. That's the foundation of everything.
Yeah, that metaphor makes sense. So in terms of getting like some really tangible sort of image in the listener's head of what this shows up as, the messaging, we've got the title of the podcast, the title of the episodes, the show notes. I mean, you're from a copywriting background as well, so this is right up your street. The description. Are we also talking about what they're saying in the episodes, or are we mostly focused on like the packaging around them?
Everything should be in alignment. Alignment, is obviously when two things they come together and they fit together well. Think of two gears in a machine. If those gears are not in alignment, they just sort of grind on each other and they wear each other down. But if they're offset slightly, those gears can click together and they can roll together and function properly and accomplish whatever the mission of that machine is. Well, that's what a lot of podcasters are doing with a vague message, is the gears are kind of grinding instead of working together. And it's like everybody who ever started a business or a podcast, it's the question, who's it for? That's the biggest thing. Like, who specifically is it for? Niching down, having an idea. This is not new information. This is basic marketing 101. But people are so vague. So many podcasters are so vague about who exactly they're for that they can't fill in the rest of the details that will guide them and tell them what to say in order to get those people's attention. So, for example, you want to know where your listener is trying to go. They're listening for a reason to your podcast. Well, what outcome? What does victory look like on their battlefield? What are they trying to accomplish? Like, literally, how can you put, like, what mental picture of victory, what does that look like in the minds of those people? For example, you and I, we serve podcasters. Well, what do they want? They want more subscribers, they want more downloads, and they want to monetize more. They want to make money off their podcast. They want to have a bigger impact. They believe in their message. The last thing they want is to put in all this work and all this money and all this time and effort and editing and everything else and suffer defeat, meaning it just goes nowhere. They never really get the downloads or the traction. It doesn't make any difference in people's lives. And maybe they put 2 or 3 years of their life into this and it just flopped. If that's the case, it wasn't because they didn't try. It was probably because they didn't know who they were talking to, what those people wanted, what they're trying to avoid, and how to talk to them in a way that is compelling and gets their attention. Make sense?
Yeah. Definitely from what I've seen, even with some clients, when we're sort of helping them launch their podcast, they'll try and target too many pain points, too many completely different journeys. Like you say, you want to paint the picture of that outcome for them. But if they're, just for an example, their target market is, their customers, but also referral partners and also, their friends and family and so on. And then all of these people are going to have completely different pain points and it makes it very hard to get that messaging specific to one specific person so that they pick that podcast over 1,000 other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people literally tell me like, "Oh my gosh, it's like you've been reading my mail." Or I've had people even crazier tell me like, "I feel like God is speaking to me through you, Brian. You are speaking exactly what I've been dealing with." And I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but what I do tell them is, "Well, I can tell you this, I've done my homework on you."
Mm.
And I have a very clear picture about what you deal with and what you're trying to accomplish and what's in your way and how to guide you in the way that I can from where you are to where you want to be. When you are that dialed in that people think God is speaking to you or that you've been reading their mail, that's how you know your copy is on point and that your brand messaging is on point. Because think about this. I'll use myself as an example. The PodGasm Marketing Podcast, my podcast, it is for mainly new, but new and growing podcasters who want to get more downloads and more listeners and subscribers. And the way I do that, I serve them in a unique way. There's all kinds of like podcasts out there about growth strategies, and that's all necessary, very important. But I uniquely serve them in a very small, unique way. I do not I do not teach podcasters podcasting stuff outside of brand messaging. That's not my area. That's not on my battle plan for them. I teach them how to communicate value clearly. That's what I do. And so it's for new and growing podcasters. And look, I am one. I know the struggles that podcasters face. You put a bunch of content out and nobody finds it, you know. Well, that's where the other strategies come in that aren't really, I know them, but it's not what I teach specifically. But it's kind of like loading a gun. You can have a gun, and if there's no ammo in it, you can pull the trigger all you want. It's not going to do anything. You put the right ammo in that thing, then when you pull the trigger, now it's doing what it was designed to do, and you can hit your target. Metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, of course.
So don't be shooting blanks, by having the wrong message. It's like you're making pop pop sounds, but nothing's coming out. You're not winning.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Yeah, and I don't know if you have like any more specific examples of like clients that you've worked with where you've kind of changed what they were thinking of in terms of the messaging. Like when you were saying that, just one comes to mind for me. We work with a creative business coach, Matt Essam, and he has a podcast, Creative Courage, and the questions that he asks are so specific to creative business owners. Like there are so many business podcasts out there, but if you can put a podcast together that's targeted towards a very specific kind of business, then even just from that, you've automatically sort of potentially got their clicks over a more generic business podcast.
Yeah, well, and think about who generally are you serving? And then also think about, like, specifically within that group, is there a segment of that group more specifically? Like, if it was podcasters, is it men or women or both? Is it business podcasters? Is it creative podcasters? Is it health and nutrition podcasters? And then once you even decide that, you can even go a third level down and more, but you could say, okay, what if it was a podcast for men who have business podcasts and they're new to podcasting? So not only did I define like who they are, what their niche is, but also I could say, for example, where are these people in their journey? Are they people just getting into business, or are they in the middle of a growth phase, or are these people trying to exit a business? That's a whole process. If you've ever sold and exited a business, there are best practices. That's a whole process. I've never done it, but I have friends that do. So you could also look at like, where is this specific person? Tweak it even more if you want. What part of the journey are they in? Are they beginning, middle, ending, or completing something? It all depends on what you're trying to do. Does that make sense though? I mean, think about your podcast. Anyone listening, try to apply that to niching down your audience, because you can speak a lot more specifically once you start doing that. And those are just a few metrics you can look at.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like looking at your description for your podcast, for example, you're saying we show new and beginner podcasts just like you. So podcasters just like you. Sorry. So it's, yeah, specifically for them where they are in their journey. Some people might think, am I, missing out on potential listeners by saying that specifically? Because if you've been podcasting for years, they might not think it's for them. But it means that those new and beginner podcasters are going to choose your podcast over another one.
Well, think about this too, though, because that is a common fear, but that doesn't mean you lose. I mean, for example, would you rather have 10,000 people that just sort of know about you, but they don't listen much and they don't buy from you? Or would you have 1,000 people who absolutely love what you do? They listen to every episode, and every time you put something out, 20 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 out of 10 actually buy or engage with you. Like, that's way more powerful. You would rather have a smaller audience that is highly engaged than a large audience just sort of floating around and doesn't do much. People mistake that. They get focused on those numbers, and you want a lot of people listening, of course, but you want a lot of the right people listening. And that's why your brand messaging is so important. Because when someone looks at my podcast description that you just read, I help new and growing podcasters say what they do so their podcast will grow. Someone goes, "Oh, I'm a new podcaster," or maybe someone's like, "Well, I've been doing it for a year, but I'm still trying to grow. I feel like I'm new." This isn't for the guys who have been doing this, or the men and women podcasters been doing this for 5 or 10 years. If you're Amy Porterfield or John Lee Dumas, like, if you have like millions of downloads already, like, it's not for you, because you either know how to do this already, or you have copywriters doing this for you already. Like, I'm not for the people who are at the top of podcasting wanting to expand. I'm for the people coming in on the front end, because so many podcasts, they get launched and they fail. There's consistency, but there's also that lack of, what's it about? Think about the foundation of a house. If you just threw a bunch of dirt together, they're like, well, the dirt looks flat enough. Let's build a house on it. Versus, hey, we're going to bring a professional concrete service, a foundation company. They're going to lay concrete, the slab, and this thing's going to be sturdy for the next 100 years. What's the better one to build on? Because if you do it wrong in the beginning, you sooner rather than later, you're going to start having cracks in that foundation. It's going to start having issues that you have to fix in 2, 3, 5 years. Whereas if you build it right from the start, and this foundation is your brand messaging, what you're about and what people get out of you, the benefit. If you get this right from the start, now you're not building a bad product that's going to fail faster because it has great marketing. You're going to have a good product that grows and expands faster because you have great marketing. Or everything you do, it promotes a compelling and clear, consistent message that is beneficial for the right people you're trying to reach. Now you just dump gas in the fire, and more of the right people, when they see it, they'll come and listen to it. Whereas if you didn't have that brand messaging on par, a lot of people, they wouldn't necessarily know it's for them. They wouldn't be that interested, because, like you said, it could be from your podcast title to your description. That tells them what it's about and what they get out of it. Episode titles, those are dialed in because I know what to address, because I know who I'm talking to. Or even having guests. What guest do you have on? If I'm teaching people how to grow a podcast, I might have someone like you on my podcast as a guest. I wouldn't have a health coach on. Why would I have that person on? Like, beneficial information, but it has nothing to do with the battlefield that my listeners are on. It doesn't help them get what they want that they listen to me to hopefully accomplish. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So if we think about all these sort of aspects of your messaging, titles and so on, could you give us an example of, and you can use your own here, like a good podcast title or two, and what a bad podcast title looks like? Maybe you've come up against some with clients or just looking at podcasts. If you could give a couple of examples.
Yeah, I'm looking at mine right now on my phone, actually, in Apple Podcast. Let's see here. The first 8 podcast episodes of mine, by the way, it's an 8-part series. And all mine are under about 10 minutes. They're very short, but they're powerful, and you can apply what you learn quickly. But the first 8 are called How to Brand Your Podcast the Right Way So More People Will Subscribe and Listen. Then it's part 1, part 2, part 3, of 8.
Yeah.
Well, look at this. How to what? Do something they need to do. Brand your podcast the right way. So that what? Well, think about outcomes that podcasters want to get. So more people will subscribe and listen. So that's a headline structure. By the way, if you want to get good at writing episode titles, go just Google great headlines. There is an art to headlines that work. All right. And there's a lot of them that work out there. You can use the same headlines. You just modify them. The structure works well. You can pull out what someone else was saying, different words, and put in your own words. Clarify your podcast marketing message so more people will listen. That's a headline.
Yeah.
What do I help you do? What's the benefit? Clarifying your podcast marketing message so that what? The outcome everyone wants that listens to me. So more people will listen. There's do these 3 things wrong and your podcast will fail. That's episode 11. Now, here's why that works. It invokes curiosity and it invokes fear. Like, oh my gosh, what are those 3 things? Am I doing them wrong? That can cause my podcast to fail. So it's got a little bit of fear in it. And I'm careful with that. If you use too much fear, you just come off like a politician and nobody likes you.
Yeah.
But episode 14, this podcast brand messaging works every time. And I give an example in there of what you can say using a certain structure that every time you use it, people notice it, especially if you know who you're talking to. That's where this really comes into play. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if anyone's not sure about their titles or struggling, then go on to Brian's podcast. There's a link in the show notes, but there's some really good examples of how to name your episodes because they're just irresistible, really. Just looking through them now, I want to click on them. Like, this podcast brand messaging works every time. It's 8 minutes long. It's like a really specific thing that you're going to get. Then nice, short and snap. And then you've got a lot of them which are like how to do something so that something. So you're giving that tangible, the kind of win for them. And then I noticed you got quite a lot of like list numbered episodes, like these 3 branding mistakes, do these 3 things wrong, these 2 podcast thumbnail tips. So I guess that helps kind of break it down as well.
It really does when you put a number on things. That way, people know. And there's something about the number 3, by the way.
Yeah.
When you have like the 3 things, something about 3s in nature and life, there's just completion with it. It's easier to see how you can digest information if it's just like 3 steps. And so that's another, copywriting thing. If you have a plan, like when I say your listeners are on a battlefield trying to get from where they are to where they want to be, and your podcast is like air support. It's like you're flying over the battlefield, helping them across it. Well, you don't want to give them 58 and a half steps. Like, give them 3 big steps. Like, here's the 3 big things. There might be a couple steps within each of those 3 things, but if you give them too many, it gets confusing. And I actually based my communication framework that I teach when I do consulting and I write brand messaging for podcasters. I use literally, it's an adaptation of what's called an operations order in the United States military. It's literally the concepts of how we plan and carry out missions in war zones that we've been doing for a couple hundred years now plus. And the things on this that I adapted, these concepts, they work because they were designed to keep, win battles when life and death is the consequence of winning or losing. So when it comes to communicating on a battlefield, showing up to a battle that is now different suddenly than you thought it was, or there's chaos all around you and it's loud and there's confusion and you have to communicate clearly and keep everyone on the same page so you can win the battle and not lose the battle. These concepts that I use to write brand messaging and I teach to people, to podcasters, that's why they work. Like, I didn't come up with them all. I just adapted them and their communication techniques that have been proven. And so that's why it's so important to be able to see your listeners on a battlefield, because it's just a mind framework that's easy to see. And once you know how a battlefield works, you know how to make your life work. You know how to make your podcast messaging work.
Yeah. And this kind of framework that you've built and that you're telling your own story as well, I imagine that must help sort of structure things for people and help them remember you as a host as well.
Yeah, if I can be helpful, that's great. I don't know anyone else who is teaching podcasters how to write compelling brand messaging using, military style warfare communication strategies that are proven to work. But that is what I do, because it's my background. It's just what I come from, and it works every time.
I don't want to give the game away, but if we dive into a couple of the strategies that you've taught in some of these episodes, and then obviously people can have a listen if they want to hear more. But you've covered a few things that we haven't spoken about yet, like the thumbnail, the cover art. Can you give us an idea of some of the mistakes that you see people making in their cover art for their podcast?
Yeah, the thing is, it's two things with podcast cover art. One, it needs to catch people's attention. You need to grab people by their eyeballs.
Yeah.
As you're scrolling through their smartphone looking for podcasts. That's why mine is bright freaking red. Because red, like psychologically, it screams stop. It's bright red. Like you can't scroll past me in your podcast app without noticing. Okay, so think about somebody driving down the interstate doing like 70 miles an hour, and there's a billboard. The first thing you have to do is grab their eyeballs. Forget the message. If you can't grab their attention momentarily, literally command their attention, make them look at you, a lot of people aren't going to. They're not going to notice you. But then the second thing is, when they see it, they have to understand very quickly, what's in it for me? Like, what benefit do I get? Here's a great example. I used to live in Dallas, Texas. I love this example. It's the funniest thing. I was driving down the Dallas North Tollway. It's an interstate going north and south through Dallas, Texas. And there is a fluorescent bright pink billboard on the side of the highway. Huge. And there was a picture of an orange tabby cat with messed up hair, and its face looked mad. Like, hair messed up, it looked mad. And in big old bold white letters, it said WTF ? You can't, like, what in the world?
Yeah.
Underneath it, it said, where's the funding? It was for the Dallas Animal Humane Society. They were trying to fundraise and raise awareness for the Humane Society for the animals they have, and trying to get animals adopted. But I remember this from like a decade ago. It's been 10 or 12 years. Bright pink, angry cat, big old letters, WTF. You just go, what? Wait, what? And then you found out what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, and you've remembered it.
So think about how that applies to your podcast. How are you grabbing people's eyeballs? Like right now, I don't even have a picture of me on it. I thought about doing that, but really, I don't have a big ego about it, but I don't think it would grab people's eyeballs more. Maybe we'll change it in the future, but it's red. It's got the big old title right there. It's got the two. I did put two phrases on there in big bold white. So it's bright red. It says PodGasm. That's the name of the show. But then it also says in big bold white letters, get noticed, grow your podcast. So I could fit those very quick phrases on there in big letters, so you can see it when it's, less than an inch tall and wide on your smartphone. You can still see that. And those are benefits, by the way, because what podcaster doesn't want to get noticed and grow their podcast? So immediately you go, oh, grow your podcast, get noticed. So those are benefits.
And I think some people, like just looking at your podcast cover art, which if you're watching on YouTube will have popped up, I think a lot of people would be tempted, instead of having those two benefits at the bottom, to put like hosted by, you could have put hosted by Brian Fleming at the bottom, but that's just taking up sort of visual real estate, and instead you've chosen to give them the benefits, because before they've started listening to you, it's not really going to give them a reason to listen unless they know you. So
yeah, exactly. Well, and that's a good point you just made. Nobody knows who the hell Brian Fleming is as pertaining to podcasts. So who cares? Like, it doesn't add to the value. See, I wasn't focused on trying to highlight myself. I was focused on trying to grab your attention and then convey value strong enough that you'll be compelled to check out the episodes. It's kind of like when you walk through a bookstore, right? You see a book, what grabs your attention first? The cover, right? Cover grabs your eyes. You read the title. If the title and subtitle are compelling, what do? You flip it over, you read the back. If that's compelling, you might open it up, look at the table of contents, and then you buy the book based on whether or not you're sold at this point. It's the same way with your cover art, your about description, your titles, your episode descriptions. When you are clear on who you're for and you know how to say what you do in a compelling and clear way, that the right people understand the value that you're giving them, all those things will be in alignment. And that is a powerful thing to have.
yeah, totally. And yeah, I think some podcasters might be worried, like if they don't put their name in, then people won't know who it's about, and
they don't know you anyway.
Yeah, and because they want to grow their personal brand and stuff, but if you don't get clicked on in the first place, your personal brand's not going to grow. Whereas your podcast, even though other than the author section, there's nothing to tell me it's from you, the fact that you're giving value then brings people into your ecosystem. And yeah, if you just sort of make it about you, then that won't happen.
Think about if you had a restaurant and you had really good food. If you can't get people through the door, it doesn't matter how good your food is. And if all it talks about in your promotion of your restaurant is how great you are as the chef, well, when I'm hungry, I'm not thinking about the chef and his name or her name. I don't care about that. I want to see like world's greatest manicotti, or best juicy steaks in town. Like when I'm hungry, I don't give a rip about the cook or the owner of the restaurant. I want to know like what am I getting that I want? It's like, forget who's doing it. Now, when you do something well enough, long enough, people will then know your name by default because they hear it and they listen to you all the time. You will start to be associated with that value, and your value and popularity and reputation will increase because you're the person now who is known as the one who helps people get what they want. You always want to be that person who helps people get what they want. You'll never be out of a job. You want to make more money? Help a company get more of what they want, which is saving money or making money.
Yeah.
Or whatever the situation is. When you help people get what they want, you will by default become known and loved and trusted, and it will work out the way you're hoping it will.
Yeah. Yeah. So some good tips on cover art. Like if you think that yours might not sort of fulfill these criteria, or you think it might not stand out, then it's worth having a look just for the listener. And yeah, about getting it to stand out, if you're not sure regarding colors and all that kind of thing, one thing you could do is just search for other podcasts within your space. And, if they're all blue, then having a bright red cover art is going to stand out really easily. Or, if they're all kind of dull, like gray, white, black, and then, yeah, a bright pink one like that billboard would probably stand out really easily. And people scroll through these apps so quickly. If you can grab their attention like that, you can.
Yeah, you have like a millisecond to grab their attention.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for all that insights. Is there anything that you're planning next for your podcast? Like what's on the horizon for the rest of the year and the sort of 2025?
I just continue to publish. We have stuff. The episodes already published through the new year, already scheduled out. So I publish, once or twice a week, and we just have a ton of content. My whole goal is, and this is how every business works, because podcasting is a business. You give a ton of value. and you just focus on providing value, being good for people, being real, being good to people, and yes, saying what you do in a way that they understand the benefits of how you help people like them specifically, and things work out on their own. And it's just by nature. And I understand a lot of people don't necessarily know how to do copywriting because it's an art that you learn and develop.
Mm.
And maybe they're good at something else, whatever they talk about. And you should be the expert at your thing that you're talking about. But that's why I would often do, podcast consulting, brand message consulting for podcasters. And I'll just sit down with them. I'll talk 10 or 15 minutes just to see if we're a good fit. And if we want to work together, I'll actually sit down for an hour or so with them, get all the information I need, and I will write all of their brand messaging for them. So they can literally just copy and paste what I write into their about section, into their episode description, into their episode title if that's what they want. And it's all in alignment. It's all said right. It's said well. It's powerful. It's compelling. I don't know how to do a lot of things in the world. There's very few things I'm actually really good at. I'm a word nerd. I'm a word guy. This is one of my sweet spots that I have almost 2 decades of experience in, and I love doing it. When I first found out about copywriting, I didn't know it was a thing. I was writing headlines because it was fun. I was entertained by it. I didn't know people actually made money doing it. I'd never heard of a copywriter. And so, yeah, I enjoy doing that. And, I work with a limited number of people every month. But, if anyone's interested in that, you can just shoot me an email at podgasmshow@gmail.com just to, check my availability and see if we're a good fit.
Cool. Yeah, and you've got a free download for people as well if they want like some quick tips on clarifying their marketing message.
Yeah, if you want a super easy way to clarify your podcast marketing message, there's like 7 or 8 steps I outline in this 3-page PDF. It's called Speak Your Listener's Language. It's how to say what you do so more people show up, subscribe, and listen to your podcast. It's like everything else I do. It's short, it's easy to apply, and it's powerful. And I show you a few steps in there, and then I show you how to literally just put those things together in a very simple way. So you walk away going, oh my gosh, like that's exactly what we're about. I just didn't know how to say it that way. It's because I not only give you those key steps, but I give you a structure to plug those key steps into once you write out the couple of things. And so, yeah, just go to podgasmshow.com and grab that free PDF download. I'm not going to spam you or anything. If you want that and you never want to hear from me again, just click on subscribe at the bottom of the email. But my whole goal is to help you clarify your marketing message so that more people will subscribe to your podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, that link will be in the show notes. And yeah, thanks again, Brian. That was really helpful. Like loads of tips there in just half an hour or so. That's, I'm sure, going to help some people if they're sort of not getting the listeners that they want right now.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.